The sun wasn't up yet. But Maggie Peterson was. Every morning in her son's house started the same way. At 5:30 a.m., she would shuffle quietly into the kitchen, careful not to wake the rest of the family, and start the stove. Bacon for Ethan. Oatmeal with almond butter for Brianna. Pancakes with extra syrup for little Josh. And scrambled eggs just the way 6-year-old Lila liked them. 4 different breakfasts. No thank yous. The smell of coffee and sizzling eggs filled the air. But warmth was the last thing Maggie felt. Not in this house. Not in Boise, Idaho, where the spring chill seeped into her bones, and no one seemed to notice the woman who kept everything running. 12 years ago, she'd moved in after her husband, Harold, passed away from a sudden heart attack. The plan was to stay just a few months to grieve, to find her footing again. But months turned into years. And somehow, she had become permanent, not as a guest, not as family, but as something between a live-in nanny and an unpaid maid. Grandma, where's my soccer jersey? Josh stormed into the kitchen. Eyes frantic, voice sharp. It's on the drying rack. Honey, she replied gently, flipping pancakes. Just where we left it last night. No, it's not, of course. It was. Maggie wiped her hands, left the sizzling skillet behind, and found the jersey exactly where she said it would be. By the time she returned to the kitchen, the pancakes had burned. She sighed and started over. At 7:15, Brianna came downstairs flawless as always. Cream blazer. Not a single hair out of place. Her greeting wasn't a good morning, but a demand Maggie. Did you prep the meeting notes I left on the table? They're already in your briefcase, Maggie said softly, pouring coffee into 3 mugs. Brianna didn't respond. She just sipped and looked at her watch. At 7:25, Ethan entered the kitchen, still scrolling on his phone. Mom, he said without looking up. You oversalted the eggs again. No. Good morning. No smile. Just a critique. Sorry. Ethan, Maggie replied, though she knew she hadn't. Silence. Her hands ached. Her knees throbbed. And still, she moved through the motions. As the family sat down to eat the meal she'd spent hours preparing, Maggie stood by the stove forgotten. 12 years of sacrifice. And she had become invisible in the very home she helped hold together. She didn't know it yet. But that morning was the beginning of the end. And sometimes, the end is where freedom begins. It started with a dinner Maggie didn't eat. Tara, her daughter from Twin Falls, showed up late that evening. She hadn't called, hadn't texted. She just walked through the door wearing expensive boots and a tired smile, complaining about her ex-husband and how hard it was raising a teenager on her own. Maggie nodded politely, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd just finished folding laundry, and the roast was still warm in the oven. She offered to reheat dinner. Tara declined. She wasn't hungry, but she did need to talk. They waited until Ethan and Brianna came home. Then, all 4 of them gathered in the living room. Maggie sat in her usual spot on the edge of the couch, hands folded, heart uneasy. She didn't know what this was, but she knew that nothing good ever started with. We need to talk. Ethan spoke first, eyes glued to his phone. Mom, we've been meaning to discuss something for a while now. Tara leaned forward. It's about your role here. My role, Maggie repeated, confused. You've lived with Ethan for over a decade now, Brianna said, crossing her legs. And we think it's time you consider what comes next. What comes next? Maggie's voice barely carried over the room. Tara took a breath. Mom, I'm behind on Pearl's tuition and my car's in the shop. I asked if you could help just a little, but you said you couldn't. I've been giving most of my pension to Ethan for groceries and the kids. Maggie replied, her voice trembling. And yet, Brianna interjected sharply. You've been complaining more and more. Your back hurts. Your knees ache. You can't lift the laundry baskets anymore. Maggie blinked. The room felt suddenly smaller. Ethan finally looked up. Mom, you're not helping the way you used to. You're becoming a burden. There it was. The word. Burden. It hit harder than any slap. Maggie's lips parted. But no sound came out. I clean. I cook. I watch your kids. She whispered. Every single day. And that's the least you can do. Brianna shot back. We gave you a roof when Dad died. Maggie stood. Her legs shaky but her voice rising. You didn't give me a roof. I gave you my life. I worked 2 jobs to pay for your college. Ethan, I sold my car so Tara could move after her second divorce. I've been here first to rise. Last asleep for 12 years. And now you can't even help your own daughter, Tara scoffed. You must have saved something from Dad's life insurance. Why are you hoarding it? I split that money between the 2 of you 10 years ago. Maggie said, and I never asked for anything back. Ethan crossed his arms. Mom, we think it's best you find another place to live. We'll help you pack. Maggie didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just nodded. And in that moment, something inside her broke, but something else quietly began to bloom. The next morning, Boise was cold and overcast. The kind of gray sky that makes everything feel heavier. Maggie didn't sleep much. She had spent the night staring at the ceiling. The echo of Ethan's words bouncing in her mind. You're a burden. Now. At 5:00 a.m., she stood by her small bedroom closet packing. There wasn't much to take. A few blouses. 2 pairs of slacks. A cardigan she wore when her knees ached. She folded each piece neatly, placing them into an old maroon suitcase that still smelled faintly of mothballs. She tucked in a framed photo of Harold, her late husband, and a small porcelain ballerina he'd given her on their first anniversary. The rest books, cookware, quilts she'd sewn by hand. She left behind. She wouldn't have room. She wouldn't look back. By 6:15, the house was still asleep. She walked downstairs as quietly as possible, her joints aching with each step. The kitchen was dark, the air heavy with silence. She placed a note on the counter. Short, dry, just like the way they'd spoken to her these past few years. I'm leaving. I'll call when I'm settled. Mom. She stood in the doorway for a long second, staring at the life she'd poured herself into for over a decade. There were the lunchboxes she packed, the curtains she ironed, the breakfast table where no one ever said thank you. It never really felt like home. She had only been a guest on borrowed time. And now her time was up. She stepped outside. The air was crisp, and her suitcase wheels made a soft rattling sound along the concrete. The farther she walked from that house, the lighter she felt. Not because her problems were solved, but because, for once, they were finally her own. No one barking orders. No one watching her, every move with quiet judgment. Just Maggie. And the road. She passed through the nicer part of town, well-kept lawns, shiny SUVs, American flags hanging straight and proud from porches. Then came the older neighborhoods, where fences leaned sideways and paint chipped from the siding. That felt more like reality. At the corner of 9th and Myrtle, she caught a bus heading west. The driver, a silver-haired man with a warm smile, opened the door. "Where to?" "Ma'am." Maggie paused. She hadn't thought that far ahead. "To the last stop?" "Please." He nodded. Woosher. She handed him $2 and took a window seat halfway back. The bus hissed as it pulled away. And she watched the city blur past schools, gas stations, bakeries she once took the grandkids to. She clutched the ballerina in her bag tightly, as if Harold were still holding her hand. No home, no plan, almost no savings. But she had something else now. Something she hadn't felt in years. A beginning. The bus rumbled to a stop on the western edge of Boise Garden City. Not exactly the pretty postcard part of town. But it was quiet, with small storefronts and weathered houses that wore their age honestly. Maggie stepped off the bus, her suitcase thumping onto the curb behind her. Across the street stood a faded white sign that read Maple Rest Inn. It wasn't much, just 2 stories of stucco walls, metal staircases, and potted geraniums on the windowsills. But it was open, and it looked safe. She crossed the street and stepped inside. The lobby smelled faintly of cinnamon and disinfectant. Behind the desk sat a woman in her early 60s with silver curls, reading a paperback mystery. She looked up and smiled gently. "Well, hello there. Checking in, yes," Maggie said, her voice a little shaky. "Just for a few days. Until I figure out my next step." "No problem at all," the woman said, rising. "We've got rooms open. I'm Ruth. By the way, Ruth Jensen, owner, manager, and resident coffee snob. Maggie Peterson," she said with a tired smile. Ruth handed her a clipboard. $30 a night. Includes toast and coffee in the morning. Just fill that out, and I'll get your key." As Maggie filled in her name and address, her mind drifted to her bank balance, barely over $300. 10 nights. Maybe less. Once meals and other expenses were factored in, Ruth returned with 2 brass keys. Room 204. 2nd floor. End of the hall. "Want help with your bag?" "No. Thank you," Maggie replied. Her knees ached, but her pride hurt more. The room was modest. A double bed with a crocheted blanket, a tiny television mounted on the wall, and a bathroom with worn tiles but spotless fixtures. She sat on the edge of the bed, closed her eyes, and exhaled. It wasn't home, but for the first time in a long time, it was hers. Later that afternoon, Ruth knocked softly on her door. "I'm heading to Wynn's Market around the corner. Need anything?" Maggie thought for a moment. "Maybe just some milk and bread? I can come with you." "Even better." Ruth grinned. "Let's walk." The market was small but packed floor to ceiling. Behind the counter stood Mr. Nguyen, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes and a long gray ponytail. He welcomed Ruth like an old friend, and nodded at Maggie with gentle curiosity. While Ruth gathered groceries, Maggie found herself staring at a rack of lottery tickets. She'd never bought one in her life. Harold always said they were nonsense, but something pulled at her. "Pick me your luckiest," she told Mr. Nguyen, sliding a $2 bill across the counter. He smiled mysteriously, picked a green ticket with a clover on it, and handed it over. "This one's special. I saved it for someone." Maggie tucked it into her purse and forgot about it by nightfall. Little did she know that $2 ticket was about to rewrite her entire life. That night, the motel was unusually quiet. Maggie sat on her bed in room 204. sipping peppermint tea Ruth had left for her. The green lottery ticket sat forgotten in her purse until she overheard a voice down the hallway. They're about to announce the numbers. It was Ruth, calling from the lounge where a small television flickered in the corner. Maggie hesitated. She'd never cared about the lottery, but something about that silly little ticket tugged at her. She walked down the hall and joined Ruth, who was sitting cross-legged on the worn plaid couch, watching the local news. Come on. Sit. You might be the next millionaire. Ruth joked. Maggie smiled and pulled the ticket from her sweater pocket. The announcer appeared on screen, full of forced cheer. And now tonight's Idaho Lucky Clover, numbers 21, 45, Zoo, 33, 70, and the bonus number, 11. Maggie stared at her ticket. She blinked, then blinked again. Ruth glanced over. Did you match any? Maggie didn't speak. Her hands were trembling. All of them. She finally whispered. Every number. Ruth snatched the ticket, her eyes scanning it like a hawk. She looked up, stunned. Oh my lord. Maggie. You won. You actually won. A beat of silence. Then the lounge erupted. Other motel guests peeked in, cheering, clapping, laughing in disbelief. Someone offered champagne from a bottle left over from a birthday party. Maggie stood frozen in the middle of it, all eyes wide, heart pounding. How much, she whispered. Ruth turned back to the screen. Tonight's jackpot is $820,000. Maggie sat down, hard. The next morning was a blur of reporters, phone calls, and paperwork. She and Ruth drove to the state lottery office, where Maggie handed over her ticket with shaking hands. The officials verified it. It was real. She was real. And her life had just been rewritten. After taxes, Maggie would take home just over $600. Zero, enough to buy a home, live comfortably, maybe even travel. But money wasn't what overwhelmed her most. It was the sudden, shocking reversal of fortune. Yesterday, she was a discarded woman in a borrowed room with an aching back and $300 to her name. Today, she was a woman with choices, freedom, dignity. As they left the office, Ruth put a hand on her shoulder. You know what this means, don't you? Maggie looked at her, dazed. It means, Ruth said softly, you don't owe anyone anything anymore. Those words settled deep in Maggie's bones. She didn't owe Ethan for the years of cold coffee and colder words. She didn't owe Brianna or Tara explanations. She didn't have to beg for space in a house that treated her like a shadow. For the first time in over a decade, she was no longer someone else's burden. She was her own beginning. The motel hadn't even settled from the shock of Maggie's lottery win when the phone calls began. The first came the next morning from Tara. Her voice was sugary sweet, like artificial honey. Mom, I just heard the news. I'm so happy for you. I mean, what a blessing. Right, Maggie stared at the phone in silence. How did you get this number? She asked calmly. Ethan gave it to me. Tara replied, not missing a beat. He wanted to call you too. But I said, let me talk to her first. You know, woman to woman. Maggie didn't answer. We've all been worried. Tara continued. You just left. And no one knew where you went. That wasn't safe. Mom, anything could have happened to you. Maggie's tone turned flat. I left a note. None of you called. Until now. Tara gave a dry little laugh. Well, come on. Don't be like that. You're still family. And the kids miss you? Pearl talks about you all the time. At the mention of her granddaughter's name, Maggie felt her heart twist. Let her know Grandma loves her. Maggie said softly, but I'm not coming back. There was a pause. A flicker of real emotion or just regrouping. But Mom? Tara tried again. You're not used to handling money. You need help. You should at least come stay with us for a while so we can make sure you're not. I'm fine. Tara. Maggie cut in. I've already hired a financial advisor. A real one. Tara scoffed. Oh. Come on. Who? Some guy you just met at a diner. No. Someone Ruth introduced me to. His name's Wesley Moore. Licensed. Verified. And not asking me for anything. Her daughter's voice sharpened. Seriously, you trust some motel woman more than your own daughter? Yes. Maggie said simply. Because Ruth never asked me for a dime. Click. The call ended without goodbye. But that wasn't the last of it. That afternoon, the motel front desk rang her room. Ma'am. There's a Mr. Ethan Peterson here asking to see you. Maggie's stomach turned. Tell him I'm not available. 5 minutes later, a knock came anyway. She opened the door just a crack. And there he was. Her son. Ethan. Dressed in business casual. Trying to smile. Holding a bouquet of gas station roses. Hey. Mom. He said softly. Can we talk? She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. You've got 5 minutes. He sighed. I know we messed up. I know what we said. About you being a burden. That wasn't fair. But you left so fast. And then this whole lottery thing happened. What do you want? Ethan, he hesitated. Honestly, I'm worried about you. That's a lot of money. You need someone to help manage it. Someone you trust. No. Ethan, she said. What you want is access, not trust. He blinked. Caught. And Maggie quiet. Worn. Invisible Maggie stood straighter. For once, she said, I trust myself. Then she turned and walked back into room 204. And this time, she closed the door without looking back. Maggie didn't want to keep dodging phone calls. She was tired of silence. Tired of avoidance. It was time to end this cleanly. So, she invited them. One last meeting. One final conversation. She picked the place River and Vine. A quiet bistro with big windows and soft lighting. Classy. But not flashy. She made the reservation for 3 herself. Ethan. And Tara. When the day arrived, she wore her new ivory blazer, hair neatly curled. Subtle lipstick. Steady breath. She wasn't walking in as a mother desperate for approval, she was walking in as a woman with dignity. Tara arrived first. Her usual flustered energy barely masked by forced politeness. Mom. You look good. I mean, really good. Thank you. Tara. Maggie replied evenly. Have a seat. Ethan walked in 5 minutes later, carrying the same leather briefcase Maggie had bought him for college graduation. Funny how small details stick with you. They ordered lunch salmon for Maggie, salad for Tara, steak for Ethan. But no one touched their food. Mom. Ethan said, leaning forward. We appreciate you agreeing to meet. There's been tension. We just want to clear the air. I agree. Maggie said, calmly placing a folder on the table. Which is why I brought these. Tara eyed the folder. What is it, my will? And a breakdown of where the money is going. Tara stiffened. Ethan froze mid-chew. I've created an educational trust. Maggie continued. For Pearl, Josh, and Lila, $500,000 to be released when they turn 21 for school. Or a first home. Nothing else. You made a will, Tara asked. Our voice cracking. Already I'm 65. That's not premature. It's responsible. Ethan frowned. And you did this without telling us. Yes, she said. Without apology. Because it doesn't concern you. He leaned back. Frustrated. You don't trust us. No. Maggie answered. Locking eyes with her son. I don't. Silence. Tara looked hurt. Mom. We made mistakes. But we're your kids. That should still mean something. It does. Maggie said. It means I raised two people who thought I was only valuable as long as I was useful. And when I wasn't, when I got old and tired, you pushed me out. Tara wiped a tear. Ethan didn't say a word. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to shame you. Maggie continued. I just need you to understand I'm not coming back. Not to your house. Not to that role. So what now? Ethan asked bitterly. You just disappear from our lives. No. You can visit. You can bring the kids. But if you come as my guest. Not as my superior. Not as my keeper. They didn't respond. Maggie stood. I paid for lunch already. I wish you both well. Then she picked up her folder, straightened her blazer, and walked away. That afternoon, Maggie didn't cry. She planted hydrangeas in her new garden. Because healing, like flowers, takes time. But when it blooms, it's worth every season of silence. The cruise was everything Maggie had dreamed of and more. Sunset in Santorini. Gelato in Rome. Narrow, cobbled streets in Barcelona where laughter echoed like music. She carried Harold's photo in her wallet, snapped pictures for the grandkids, and mailed postcards she never used to believe in. She met strangers who didn't know her past, didn't see her as a burden. They saw her as she was now a woman with stories, with wit, with freedom in her eyes. When she returned home, Idaho felt warmer. She took up watercolor painting just a class at the local community center. At first, she doubted herself. But her brush grew bolder. Flowers. Waves. Quiet windows. She painted peace. Blumenhydrangjes. Snapdragons. Peonies. With Helen's help and Robert's quiet encouragement, it became something of a local gem. The garden club even hosted a summer tea there. And Maggie stood on her porch, pouring lemonade for guests. Her cheeks flushed from laughter and sun. Robert visited often. They'd sit under the apple tree in late afternoons, sipping iced tea and watching birds land softly in the garden. We're not young, he'd say, but we're new. And that's something. Maggie would smile. Better to be new than numb. The blog she started, Fresh Starts After 60, gathered momentum. Nothing fancy. Just photos. Gardening tips. Reflections about starting over. Strangers commented, thanking her. Older women wrote, You give me hope. A retired nurse in Oregon said, I left my son's house after reading your story. Maggie never expected to inspire anyone. She just told the truth. And one crisp October morning, as golden leaves danced in the wind, her phone buzzed. A text? From Ethan. Mom, we need to talk. It's important. Please call me. She stared at the screen. Sitting in her sunlit kitchen, a mug of chamomile in her hand. Once, that text would have wrecked her, made her feel small, made her question everything. But now she looked around. The house was quiet. Her painting for the day rested on an easel near the window. Purple asters bending in the breeze. The garden was alive. So was she? She set the phone down and deleted the message. She didn't need drama. She didn't need guilt. Not anymore. She had Pearl's laughter in her heart, Robert's quiet presence in her days, Ruth and Helen's friendship. A home built on strength, not sacrifice. She stepped out onto the porch. The wind carried the scent of rosemary and late roses. Somewhere, a neighbor's wind chime played a delicate tune. Maggie closed her eyes. Not out of sorrow, but out of gratitude. She had spent a lifetime giving until she disappeared. Now, she had claimed something for herself. Her life. Her voice. Her peace. Not borrowed. Not conditional. Hers.